today we're going to start looking at 3 different parables of the kingdom of heaven. And these are all very short. That's why we're looking at 3 of them. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the first one, which is about leaven. And so because it's about leaven, I thought we should probably take a look a little bit at how that word is used in the New Testament. That might help us understand it, or it might not, but we can try to see if it will help us by looking at some of the things that it talks about. Leaven. Now, if we talk about leaven, it's really just another word for yeast, something that ferments. It's what you put in bread to make it rise. That's how it's used in the parable. It's being used to make bread. And so you just think of it as yeast, but generally it's translated as leaven. And so that's what we're looking at. In Matthew 16, Jesus talks about leaven in a figurative sense. In verse 6, it says, "Then Jesus said to them, 'Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees.'" And then later on, as they couldn't understand what he was talking about, they thought he was talking about actual physical leaven in bread. In verses 11 and 12, Jesus says, "How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees?" Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So in this case, Jesus is talking about leaven as kind of an underlying thing that affects everything else. And so the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees is what they're teaching, their doctrine. That affects how they think, it affects how they act. And so it is the leaven that they use to produce the bread, which is the person who lives according to their teaching. If you believe a false teaching, you're going to produce in yourself false actions, false beliefs, because you're filled with that leaven that affects everything in your life. In Luke chapter 12, in verses 1 and 2, it says, "In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, 'Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. For there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, nor hidden that will not be known.'" Now here he doesn't talk about the leaven specifically as their teaching, but as hypocrisy. So it's their attitude, it's their way of life, that they would teach one thing but secretly do something else. And he says, just know that you can't hide it. It's going to be revealed at some point. And so beware of that leaven, this hypocrisy. It's not going to turn out well for anyone. Don't follow their example. So it's easy to be wrapped up in the ways other religious people do things, or even the religious leaders do things. We can copy them, we can follow them without paying much attention. But he says, beware of this leaven. Don't just follow blindly the way that they do things, because they're hypocrites, and that's not going to turn out well for them. If you follow their way of life, it's not going to turn out well for you either. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, in verses 6 through 8, when he's talking about their problem of sin in the church, the man who had his father's wife, he says in verse 6, "Your glorying is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump?" In other words, you just need a little bit of leaven and it will spread through everything and affect everything. So allow this sin in the church, before long, the entire church will be sinning. And so he says, "Therefore, purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Now in this case, he's just saying leaven is representing bad things. Now that's not going to be the case, I don't think, in the parable we're going to look at. But in this case, leaven represents something bad that spreads through everything. And so there's this old leaven, the way they used to live. Get rid of that. There's a leaven of malice and wickedness. That just spreads through and affects everything you do. But you get rid of that and have the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth, with Christ being the Passover. That's how he's connecting this unleavened bread. This has nothing to do with the Lord's Supper, by the way. Well, I can't say nothing, but it's not directly connected with the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper is connected with almost everything somehow. But anyway, this is talking about the way we live, the attitude we have, sincerity and truth being the unleavened bread, okay, in our lives, that we should be feasting with Christ with. Okay, so this leaven here represents something bad, but also it gives us this picture that a little leaven leavens the whole lump. And he uses this phrase again in Galatians chapter 5 in verses 7 through 10. He says, "You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will have no other mind, but he who troubles you shall bear his judgment, whoever he is." So here the little leaven is someone who's troubling them by persuading them to believe something different from the truth. And so if you take this little false teaching, it seems like a little thing, it affects everything. You can't just take a little and it's not going to make a big difference. Leaven affects the whole bread. And so we have this idea that leaven is a powerful thing. A little bit affects everything that it is in. All right, so now let's look at the parables. The first one here is in Matthew 13. They're all in Matthew 13 that we're looking at today. This one's in verse 33. And it says, "Another parable he spoke to them. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened." All right, so that's it. And there's no explanation given. And there's no explanation given for any of the parables we're looking at today. So we have to try to take from other parts of Scripture and just examining the picture that he gives and try to understand it, especially following sort of the pattern of explanation that he's given for some of the other parables. All right, so when we look at this, we know that a parable is parallel to, it's a physical thing that's parallel to some spiritual thing. Obviously, leaven is a physical thing. The kingdom of heaven is a spiritual thing. So when you put them side by side, you've got leaven or yeast representing the kingdom of heaven. That part we know because that's stated in the parable itself. And then we have a woman took and hid this yeast in 3 measures of meal until it was all leavened. All right. So one of the things that we get in the picture itself here is that she is mixing this in until it's all leavened. And when you mix in the leaven or the yeast like that, even though I know Paul said get that, purge the old leaven out, but that's, you can't really get leaven back out once you mix it in with the flour or the meal. You can't really get it back out once it's in. And you just like leaven can't be separated out from what it's mixed with, the kingdom of heaven is not something you can just take out again. It's not some physical thing that can be destroyed. It's not some physical thing that can be gotten rid of somehow, because it gets through everything. It's in the heart of people. It's not something you can just clear out. It gets into every part of our lives and affects everything that we do if we are treating it properly. And so, these kingdom ideas affect everything else. It affects the whole world. And whether they like it or not, the kingdom is here to stay. I read a comment recently when there were some problems between brethren. Somebody said, this is why the church is dying. The church is not dying. The church is never going to die. It's not something that can die. It's not that type of a thing. The kingdom is something that spreads through everything and affects everything. And yes, in our particular life, maybe we are not affected by it properly because we got some other leaven in us that's affecting us more, which we do need to get rid of, as Paul talks about. But we need to get this leaven in us. We need the kingdom of heaven to be the leaven in our lives that affects everything and spreads through everything and spreads out from us into other people as well. So maybe there's even more to this parable that people can get out of it, but that's what I'm seeing in that as I'm looking through it today. And if you think I got it wrong, you're welcome to correct me on that as well, because Jesus doesn't explain it, so we just have to do the best we can in light of what the rest of the scriptures teach to understand what it's talking about. All right, the next one we're going to look at is in verse 44. It says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid. For joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." So, for whatever reason, this man is in a field that does not belong to him. I'm sure he has a right to be there, but he finds a treasure hidden there. And he's not dishonest. He does not steal that treasure. He doesn't tell the owner that it's there, but that's okay. He offers a price and buys that field with everything he has, which the owner of the field probably thought was a good deal. And then he has this great treasure. Of course, this has nothing to do with the previous owner of the field, right? He's not mentioned in this parable, so it really doesn't factor in at all in the meaning that Jesus is giving. So what is the idea behind this particular parable? Well, the parallel is a treasure hidden in a field is the kingdom of heaven. It's something the man is not actively looking for, but he finds it. The man found and hid it. So he finds it, and then he hides it again. It was already hidden, but now he hides it until he can buy that field, because he can't afford to buy the treasure, but he can buy the field that it's in. So he just finds this. It's not something he's looking for, but he's very joyful about it. He goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. The idea is that even when people are not looking for it, they may recognize the value of the kingdom of heaven and realize it's worth selling everything you have, physical, spiritual, emotional, educational, whatever, in order to have it. We need to recognize this value of the kingdom. And that's really, I think, pretty clearly the picture that Jesus is giving in this one and in the next parable as well. He's focused on the value of the kingdom of heaven, that it's something you will sell everything in order to get. In this case, he wasn't looking for it, but when he found it, he recognized that it was worth everything he had to get this. And it was even worth more than what he had. But he sold everything he had to get it. In verse 46, 45 and 46, actually, It says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it." All right, so now we have someone who's actively seeking something valuable. He's seeking beautiful pearls. And when he finds this one pearl that's worth more than everything else, he sells everything else that he has, and he buys that one pearl. He recognizes the value of it. All right, so we have this merchant seeking beautiful pearls. The spiritual application is that sometimes the kingdom of heaven can seem like other things. People are looking for a purpose in life. They may be looking for it in other religions. They may be looking for it in philosophy. They may be looking for it in all kinds of places. But he's looking for it, and when he finds it, when he finds the truth, he recognizes this is worth more than everything else. So he's found some of these other things, but he sees that the kingdom is worth far more than any of those. And so he goes and sells all that he has and buys it. When we come to the kingdom and we recognize the value of it, we should give up everything, right? Everything is no longer worth anything in comparison. Even things that we thought were valuable before we found this great kingdom, we're willing to part with those to be part of this kingdom. Whether we got an education that made us prideful, well, now you can't be prideful in the kingdom, so we give that up. Maybe we'll use what education we have in the kingdom for whatever good it can do, but we're not going to be prideful about it, right? When we see we got rich before we found the kingdom. Well, now we're going to see how can we use our money for the kingdom's purpose. We're going to give up these things that we don't value anymore in comparison with the value of the kingdom. That's what Jesus is focused on here. So the first one, the leaven that we looked at, it shows us that being part of the kingdom should affect us in every part of our lives, and that they basically leaven others. We get both of those pictures and how leaven is used throughout the New Testament, that it's something that will affect us individually, but it also affects everybody around us. A little leaven leavens the whole lump, whether for good or bad. So be leaven of righteousness, not wickedness and hypocrisy. But when we talk about these two other parables, the treasure hidden in the field show that sometimes people are not looking for the kingdom of God, but they find it anyway. And we're trying to help people find it. That's our one of our goals as servants of Christ, this work of the kingdom. God has promised, Christ has promised, those who seek will find. But we're also trying to help people who aren't seeking to find it, because sometimes they will recognize the value and sell everything to buy it. And then with the pearl of great price, there are people who are looking diligently for truth and for righteousness, and they're going to find it if they're truly seeking it. But then they have to really commit. They have to sell everything they own to have it. And yet it's completely worth it. They do it because they recognize the value of the kingdom. We must recognize the value of the kingdom, even those who are already in it. Let's remember how valuable it is. We can give up all our relationships, all our income, all the respect people can give us, and whatever it is that we value outside of the kingdom of Christ. To be part of this kingdom, those things are worthless. We're willing to give that up because we want to be in this wonderful, most valuable thing. All right, that's the lesson for today. Thank you very much.